Sit back, relax, enjoy tonight's story, which is The Nemean Lion, Part 2. Only one little girl can prevent darkness from engulfing the world. You know, the world's fascination with monsters harks back to the dawn of civilization, and even to prehistoric times, when mankind first sought to explain the magical and the capricious forces of nature. Civilized as the ancients were, the stories they told were filled with horrifying creatures. They called them monsters, and there was nothing civil about them. From Anteus, the bloodthirsty cannibal giant, to Hecate, the beautiful, ambitious tormentor of the dead, to the ogre Fafnir, whose guests for dinner became his dinner. The monsters of mythology embody the dark side of human nature. Their battles with Ulysses, Jason, and the other heroes and heroines of legend represent the ongoing contest between all that is worst and all that is best, and all that stands in between. Tonight, we're featuring the Nemean lion, a murderous beast who terrorizes the people of Nemea with his ivory dagger teeth, brass talons, and impenetrable armor hide. But Nemea is merely a practice ground for the lion. His true task is to serve Zeus, king of the gods, who needs a special monster to destroy the latest threat to his rule. What is that threat? A sickly, undersized little girl who is destined, the god king has been warned, has been destined to shake his entire kingdom. Last week we met Palamona, said undersized little girl. We met Palamona and Melampus when he saved her from death by the killer bee sting. And unaware of her own heroic fate, the tiny Palamona falls in love with Melampus, the healer, who can revive the dead and save them from eternity in Tartarus under Hades' brutal reign. But the healer's betrayal and Palamona's yearning for his love soon lead her to the grotesque bull man, who employs bulls to savagely tear his victims in half, shredding their skin and bones, spilling their blood like fertilizer across his furrowed land. The bull man quickly prepares Palamona for a similar end, one that would leave this ancient time desperately short of heroes. Caught between a world she so much wants to love and a world she is terribly unsure of, this young girl struggles to find answers that lie just beyond her reach. Surrounded by treacherous gods, enormous killer bees, and leather-winged demons, she must face one of the most frightening creatures to ever walk the land, the Nemean lion. Standing alone, this brave young girl is the only one who can prevent darkness from engulfing an already fragile world. So, on we go. Clouds raced across a great blowing lilac sky. Lightning split an oak. The voice of a wood nymph sounded above the thunder, but no one could tell whether she was screaming with fear or joy. For Zeus fancied dryads, and was known to brandish his thunderbolt when he came a-courting. And when the dryad who dwelt in the blasted tree was ready to give birth, the covey of oak nymphs wondered whether they were about to welcome a child of Zeus. But when the babe made her appearance, it was decided that she must have been sired by something less than a god. For this infant was undersized and looked sickly, a tiny blue scrap of tissue fighting for every breath. And nobody was surprised when she vanished, for the forest was full of hunting beasts, and the young of every species had to be hardy to survive. Indeed, to defend themselves from the terrible guys. But once every 1,000 years, a strange wind blows from all directions at once, shaking the chandelier of stars and branding the night sky with a scrawl of fire. And only the eldest fate, Atropos, lady of the shears, could read that scroll which held the mighty secrets of what was to be. Hello, J-Mac. Palamona had not eaten meat since seeing the flies clot on the head she had broken with a rock last week. At first she thought her distaste would vanish with time, but then she had learned the language of animals and became unthinkable to eat anything she could talk to. Melampus, who had conversed with bird and beast since childhood, also refrained from meat and had come to consider a spare diet essential to health. He did not forbid meat to his patients, but encouraged substitutes such as cheese, nuts, and unfertilized eggs. It was important then to grow a garden near the cave in which they dwelt, an abandoned bear's den in the foothill of Mount Pelion. Melampus dug the garden in a flat, sunny spot near the base of the hill, and after some weeks he left it wholly in Palamona's care. Now, during her lonely childhood, Palamona had helped the woodsman's wife care for a witch garden, a kitchen garden, and knew about mulching and manuring and weeding. But Melampus taught Palamona much more. He taught her to listen to the plants. No, listen isn't quite the right word. Um, However, for much of what they uttered could not be heard. Most of it was a gesture, which he taught her to read. It's a difficult language, but less so when you've learned to converse with. Try that again. There. It's a difficult language, conversing with plants, but less so once you've learned to converse with a creature like a turtle, say, who has almost nothing to say and says it badly. She learned the language of plants and was able to understand when they told her of their changing needs in all weathers and all seasons. She grew beans and onions and tomatoes and pepper and garlic. She had a garden of herbs and a small stand of barley. She did not have a separate flower garden because Melampus had taught her that certain flowers sowed among the rows of the vegetables patch served to drive away harmful insects. Melampus also kept goats, 3 milk goats and a billy goat. They were quite regular goat busters, these two. They also fell into her keeping. Being able to speak to them, she controlled them by voice and did not need the services of the big shaggy dog whom she kept for companionship, and who insisted, nevertheless, in officiously herding the goats here and there. So her days were very full, although Melampus was rarely there. Despite the danger, he had not stopped treating humans. His only bow to prudence was in trying to limit his practice to the poor and obscure people whom Hades would be less likely to notice had been pulled out of his clutch. The shepherds, buyers, and farmers' huts he visited were miles apart. His rounds consumed the daylight hours. But he returned to the cave each night, and no matter how weary he was, always had a meal with Palamona and spent some hours talking to her. He played the lyre superbly and taught her to play. And as he touched the strings in the firelit cave, his deep voice wove itself in and out of simple melody, singing her the old story songs of Thessaly. Sometimes he played without speaking, and at such times she knew he liked her to ask him questions so that he might build a story upon the answer. It was his way of teaching. He preferred to do so without seeming to. This night, she said, "Tell me about the centaurs. Are they really half person, half horse?" "No, not really." "What? Is it all a lie, then?" "Well, no, not exactly. It's a rumor based on a mistake. Actually, I'm the reason that story started. In the mountains up there live some very quarrelsome tribes, always invading each other's hunting grounds. So between border skirmishes and tribal feuds, not to mention private quarrels, I get a lot of bone setting and wound stitching to do." Yes, where do the centaurs come in?" "I'm getting to them. It's a rough country up there, I say. And I've been lame since birth, as you know, so I depend for transportation on the kindly Oreads, mountain nymphs, huge, powerful lasses, very kind and generous if they like you. And when I'm faced with a long journey, one of them always carries me on her back. So rumors spread about creatures that were half woman, half man. As the story grew, as stories do, and became the legend of the centaurs." "Oh, will you take me to see them sometime?" "Of course, if you want to go, I'd be happy to take you." "Well, yes, I want to." My next trip up there, then. I don't quite know when that will be. Black fever has flared in the lowlands, and I'll be busy down there." "Will you take me to the lowlands?" "Too much fever." "If I catch it, you'll make me better." "If you don't, I won't have to. It's a thing to avoid. Besides, who will take care of the garden? And who wants your pretty face covered up with a mask, anyway?" "Oh, yes, I suppose. Will you be gone long?" "I'll try to come back every fourth night unless things get worse. If that happens, I'll send word to you." Living with Melampus in this way, tending the garden, roaming hill and field and wood, Palamona grew happier and happier, and happiness began to make her beautiful. She had always been quick, now she was honed to a marvelous grace. She ran over the meadow without bending the grass. Her hair glimmered like cobwebs in the moonlight. Her eyes were two pools of molten gold. But best of all, yes, best of all was her laughter. It burbled everywhere, full of joyous rills and trills, nourishing itself upon its own glee. For when she heard herself laughing, this child, who had so rarely smiled, thrilled to a pleasure of self-awareness, and laughed more joyously than ever. But nothing attracts trouble like happiness. And now, in the midst of Palamona's blossoming joy, something happened that was to bear the most terrible consequences. The earth split near the foot of Mount Pelion. 6 black horses charged out of the chasm, drawing a black chariot behind them. In the chariot towered a black caped figure. It was Hades, traveling from Tartarus to Olympus for a council of the gods. As the horses galloped up the slope of sky, he chanced to notice Palamona, frolicking in the field, riding a goat, the dog chasing her. She was laughing, the dog was barking. Now, it must be understood that Hades, somber king of the land beyond death, preferred tiny, unripe maidens. It was thus, upon a legendary springtide, that he saw Persephone, only daughter of the Harvest Queen, playing with her wild paint pots among the flowers, and was smitten by a reckless passion and abducted her. Starting a feud, there was to rock Olympus. But that had been centuries before, and about 6 months ago when we told that story here. Now, the April child was now matron of the Dark Kingdom, each year becoming more and more like her mother, Demeter, whom Hades loathed more than any creature on earth above it or beneath it. So he was ripe for another unripe maiden. Hades' melancholy heart was pierced by Palamona's laughter. Her tininess intoxicated him. When he returned to Tartarus, he sent for his chief adviser, the harpy queen, Hecate. He described Palamona to her and how he felt. "Well, my lord, if you want her, take her. It's simple enough." No, not so simple at all. I could abduct her, of course, but I don't want to do it that way. I've taken a real fancy to her, you see. I don't want her so stupefied by fear that she can't learn to love me. I want her fully alive, fully responsive. I want to hear that joyous laughter and know that I'm the cause of it. Oh, yes. You're right. Not so simple then, said Hecate. How can I make her love me? Yes, well, tell you what I'll do. I'll send someone up there to observe her ways and report to you as soon as I've learned anything. Some days later, Hecate came to him and said, "Well, I regret to tell you, Majesty, it'd be very difficult to persuade that child to love you. She worships someone else." "Someone else? Who?" roared Hades. "Melampus." "Melampus? Melampus the healer?" "Yes, the very same." "Is there no end to his trespass? Did I not give orders that he be taken? I haven't heard any complaints about him lately, so I thought he must be down here somewhere." "Oh, he's alive. He dwells in Thessaly, in a cave near where you saw the girl." "Then go get him." "No, no," said Hecate. "The Great Charter permits us to take only the dead." "Well, kill him and he'll be dead, and then bring him down and spin him over as slow as fire to roast through eternity." "Forgive me for contradicting you, oh my master, but for your purposes that would be the worst possible course, you see. Palamona is not a woman grown. She has not learned to compromise with life and death. She is a pure-hearted little child. May the breed be cursed. This is her first love, uncarnal still. She worships his personality, the idea of him. If he is suddenly taken from her, it will cripple her for life, and you will have no pleasure from her." What can I do? What can I do, then? Does my dread authority confer me no real power?" Oh. There's much you can do, O Lord of Reprisals. If she herself stops loving Melampus, then she'll be ready for another to take his place. Yes. How can I make her stop loving him? By changing him beyond her recognition. How do I do that? "Huh, there I cannot advise you," said Hecate. "If he were one of those who could be changed by pain, I would know exactly how to proceed, but he is much too strong for that. His spare frame absorbs incredible punishment. I know. I've sent my fiends against him for years at your behest, but he is a kind of hero. Yes, Melampus draws inspiration from ordeal. No makes him go." "Yes, very well," said Hades. "I shall take the matter under advisement. Thank you." Hades pondered the words of Hecate. Change him, eh? Change him so she no longer loves him. Yes, yes. But how? I shall have to consult an expert. Thereupon Hades sent a messenger to summon Thalia, muse of comedy, lady of masks, mistress of transformations. Now, one would have thought that this lovely laughing goddess would have loathed the sullen Hades. In fact, though, she owed him a favor. Some time before, she had amused herself with one of her own performers, a young tumbler who was so excited by the smiles of the muse that he tried to do what had never been done before, turn 5 somersaults in the air. But he only did 4.5 and broke his neck. Thalia rushed to Hades and pleaded with him to restore the lad to her. Now, it was notorious that Hades never gave up anyone he claimed, but he was so touched to indulgence by her winsome grace. And so he yielded his claim on the young man and had Hermes conduct him back over the river Styx up through the cleft of Avernus to the grove of Muses atop Parnassus. And later, the reprieved tumbler tried to rekindle Thalia's waning affections by trying the 5 somersault trick again. This time, grown rusty, he achieved only 4 and broke his back, was taken to Tartarus and languished there unredeemed, for Thalia now favored a juggler. Still, when she received the summons, Thalia was very much aware that she owed Hades a debt, and he was not the kind of creditor she wanted dunning her. So she went swiftly to the place of rendezvous, a grove near the shore of the bottomless lake of Avernus. She found the towering black-caped figure waiting for her, his face harrowed as if he were basting in one of his own ovens. She knelt and kissed his huge knotted hand, kept it between her own, fondling it, listening very intently to what it had to say. And when he had finished, she said, "Well, that hell hag of yours gave you good counsel. Transformation is clearly indicated." "Then I can leave the matter in your hands, O my lady of the masks." "Well, I'll do my best, of course. But it's a difficult task. Not at all a simple physical transformation." "Well, I should think not," said Hades. "He's a miserable specimen, old, starved-looking lame. I should think any change in appearance would improve him." "Yes, my lord, but she wouldn't think so. She loves him the way he is." "Granted, granted, granted. Then change the way he is. I don't care how it's done, but do it." "Well, I met him once, you know. My eldest sister, Terpsichore, dismayed by the approach of a certain birthday, 39, I think it was, and trying to prove herself as young as ever, danced so wildly with Silenus that she fractured both her legs. Melampus was sent for. He came to Mount Helicon and set her legs so skillfully that in a day she was dancing on her splints. He is a remarkable man." "Yes, yes," said Hades. "And remarkable shall be his torments when I can claim his shade. Tell me plainly, despite the difficulties, can you change him so that she no longer loves him?" "Well, what we shall have to do is to coarsen him beyond her recognition, work a total change in him inwardly, which means, of course, that he will change outwardly as well. Such a transformation lies beyond my own powers, but so great is my regard for you, my dear lord, that I shall implore my mother, Mnemosyne, to help him, to help me. I shall ask her to wipe out his memories, replace it with a new set. Then we shall be able to fabricate a new personality for him, deprive him of his genius and his occupation, dedicate him to trivia, diminish him until she knows him no longer." "Well, I shall be very grateful to you," said Hades. "And as you know, my gratitude can take useful forms." "My reward lies in serving you, O sovereign of the dread realm." She kissed his hand again and whirled away, singing. When Palamona came home from the woods that summer evening, she found her garden paved over and a sentry walking his post. Behind him, half visible in the twilight, glimmered a tall brass gate. Up the slope where the cave had been stood a stone castle. "What happened?" she cried to the sentry. "Where's Melampus?" "Are you the princess?" "I am Palamona." "His lordship awaits you." Behind the gates lay a courtyard. A flagged path wound uphill to the castle. Other sentries holding huge spike-collared wolf fountains guarded the portals. She spoke her name, and they gave way before her. She felt her garment changing upon her. Old, torn, berry-stained shift became a silken gown, dusk blue, shot with lilac. Bracelets clasped her wrists. She felt a delicate chain about her neck and the cold touch of a jewel upon her breastbone. She found him sprawled in a chair in a rude banquet hall, and dogs gnawed bones. 3 unhelmeted men at arms cast dice in a corner, 3d20s and 2d6 and 1d4. The place reeked of meat and wine. Melampus was swigging from a golden cup. He beckoned her. She walked slowly toward him. He kissed her and sat half embracing her as she stood at his chair. He looked younger. His face was bloated and red, his breath heavy with wine. Through all the changes, though, she still saw Melampus. She stood there in the circle of his arms, basking in the heat of his body. She did not question him. He had always told her what she had to know, and his information had always been utterly new. She expected the unexpected. Love had so altered her that she took lesser transformations without surprise. She accepted the change in his appearance, the change from cave to castle. She wondered about her garden, though. "Melampus." "Call me father." Why?" "You're my daughter, are you not?" Oh, so that had changed, too. She didn't care. She wanted to be whatever he wanted. "Go fill up my cup like a good little girl, won't you?" "Yes, father." Palamona dwelt in the castle. She was bewildered, but acceptant. She planted another garden in a sunny corner of the courtyard beyond the flagstones. Her goats had been given into the care of a goat herd who grazed them in the field where she was no longer allowed to go. But her sheepdog was with her unchanged. She saw more of Melampus than she had before. He was no longer a healer. What he did, she did not know. He seemed to be some sort of petty chieftain. He was usually half drunk. He told her no more stories, but was more affectionate, holding her on his lap, stroking her face, kissing her hair. He was her father, and she was his daughter, and she was happy. The stream of her laughter ran its music through the castle, and if she harbored doubt or grief, no one knew it. Now Melampus had forbidden her to go beyond the walls without an escort of armed men, for the countryside had grown dangerous. Bandits roamed. And there was a tale of one more terrible who did not roam. He was known as the Bullman. He was huge, bristle-haired, red-eyed, an ugly brute who plowed in his field with 2 enormous bulls. He seized passers-by and stripped them of their purses. Then he would unhitch his bulls and bind the victim's arms to the back of one beast, his legs to the back of the other, and then whip the bulls so that they ran in opposite directions. Bones cracked, flesh tore. Each bull dragged a half a body behind it, and blood watered the furrows. Sometimes, when the wind was right, Palamona heard a thin screaming. Restlessness grew in her. She longed to wander the wood as she had once done, accompanied by no one but her dog. But she did not wish to disobey Melampus, and she curbed her longing. Then one day he left the castle with a troop of horsemen and rode up into the hills. He was gone for 3 days. On the 4th day, Palamona, watching from the wall, saw a veil of dust and horsemen riding. One of them led Melampus's horse. Her breath caught in her throat. A riderless horse meant a fallen rider. Then she saw him astride the shoulders of a towering young woman. He leaned back, laughing and shouting, clutching the braids of her long hair as if they were reins. Behind them trotted 2 other huge girls, tossing a wine barrel from one to the other, drinking as they ran. And so the mountain nymphs came to the castle. They lived in the stable, and Melampus rode them every day in turn. Palamona saw less of him, and her restlessness grew. One day, when no one was looking, she slipped through the gate and sped downhill into the woods. All day Palamona wandered, picking wildflowers. In the heat of the day, she went to the river. She cast off her clothes and dived deep, holding her breath and circling, feeling her fevers cool in the greenish dusk of the waters. It was late afternoon when she left the river. She was not ready to return to the castle and wandered back by a roundabout way. She was at the edge of the forest. Near a field she was. She heard someone scream. She crept slowly from tree to tree and peered into the clearing. It was a man screaming. He lay in the ground. A much larger man knelt on his chest, pummeling his face. Two enormous bulls stood nearby, wooden halters about their necks, reins trailing. They cropped grass near an iron plow. The huge man arose, lifting the smaller one bodily, hurling him to the ground between the two bulls. He pushed the bulls tail to tail, and he tied the smaller man's feet to the reins of one bull, his wrists to the reins of the other, and then he lifted a cudgel in each hand and he struck the rumps of the bulls, who had galloped off in opposite directions. There was a horrid screaming that sank to a gurgling moan. Palamona heard bone cracking, the small ripping of flesh, and saw the body part in the middle and blood spout as the bulls galloped to the opposite ends of the field. They turned quietly and walked back, dragging the body stumps behind them, and began to crop the bloody grass. At the edge of the field was a hut and a stall. Palamona watched as the man took the halters off the bulls and drove them into their stall. Then he went into the hut. She ran back to the castle as fast as she could. She ran into the banquet hall where Melampus sat drinking from his golden cup. Father, father, I saw a dreadful thing. I disobeyed you, dear father, and went into the woods alone. And I came to a field, and I saw a man tying another man to two big bulls, and she burst into wild sobbing and could not go on. He lifted her chin to his lap and stroked her hair. Do not weep. Little daughter, do not weep. Sunny little thing, you have not wept in all these days I have known you. You were rash, very rash, but you paid too heavily for it. You have seen the bullman at work. It's so terrible, so ugly and foul. Can't you stop it? I've been hearing screams at night. I didn't know what they meant, and now I do. I'll send for this bullman immediately, he said. You shall hear no more screams, my girl. Thank you, father. Now let me see you smile. She gulped back her tears and smiled. Let me hear your laugh. He tickled her. She laughed. Ha, ha, ha. The sweetest sound in all the world. Then he kissed her. Run off now, but remember, don't go out that gate again. Melampus instructed his men. They went down to the killing ground, fettered the bullman, brought him in, slavering and bloody-handed. He showed no fear as he faced Melampus. What? I'm only trying to earn a living. What? What? By robbery and murder? What can I do? I'm a robber and a murderer. Robbery and murder is what I do. I can do something, said Melampus. I can order your head chopped off. Bah, you wouldn't do that. Any reason why not? A sack full of reasons. 500 of them. All gold. A half year's take is buried in a secret place. You trying to bribe me? I'm trying to save my life here, man. I can't think of any other way. No, you're right. This does seem like a good way. My coffers are empty, my wine casks are dry. In the name of thirst and justice, I fine you. What'd you say you had? 500 gold pieces. Yes. I fine you 500 gold pieces. Ha ha. Thank you, Your Honor. But I must ask you change your place of business. The screams are keeping us awake. Well. There's a field a mile west ahead. I'll take my bulls over there. Very well. Expect to be summoned 6 months from now for a review of your case. Yes, a review. Understood, your lordship. I'll start saving up right now. That night, Palamona heard no more screams. She was very pleased. The silence was like a song sung to her by Melampus, who sang no more. The next day, Melampus's stewards visited the bullman and was given a sack of gold. Some hours later, a great ox-drawn wagon loaded with empty wine casks went forth from the castle. When it rolled back to the gates that evening, the casks were full. The banquet hall rocked with revelry that night. Melampus made up for a week's drought by drinking off cup after cup after cup of undiluted wine. He drank himself into a stupor, in fact, finally into insensibility. The fragments of song drifted up to Palamona in her chamber. She listened only for his voice threading among the shouts and sounds of breaking crockery. She heard the loud braying laughter of the Oreads. She fell asleep clinging to his voice. Melampus was sick and disgusted when he woke up the next morning. A lovely sunny day it was, with dogs barking, but the brightness only made his head ache. Just as he was dragging himself out of bed, he heard Palamona laughing. The clear, joyous sound went through his head like a lance. He rushed from his room and roared at her as he danced down the hallway. What are you laughing at? I don't see anything funny. The girl stopped laughing. She looked at him as if she had never seen him before. She turned swiftly and ran out of his sight. From that hour, no one in the castle heard her laugh again. There was nothing for her now but silence. The comic dance of leaf shadows was blown away by the blast of his voice. The joke of young things, of puppy, lamb, and puffed-up frog, was darkened by his anger. Streams hissed instead of giggling. The birds did not sing but mourned in different voices. She took to following him everywhere to spy upon the force that had robbed her of laughter. So light was her foot, she flitted so quickly from tree to tree and knew so well how to melt into shadows that he never actually saw her following him. He felt the pressure of a witness, nevertheless, and his mood grew heavier. Indoors, too, she followed him and was hard to catch. She darkened the mirrors so she could hide. Calling to him rarely, her voice was like bells in the cold glass. Fingering his bedclothes, she tied one knot, almost by accident, but that was enough to give him strangling dreams. He was easy only among his Oreads, finally. Early each morning he went to the stable and he whistled. A mountain nymph appeared, stretching her long arms and laughing at the sky. She grasped him about the waist, lifted him over her head, and set him solidly on her shoulders. For that instant, astride one of his magnificent tall nymphs, the bewildered pain slipped from his face. He grasped the reins of her hair, and she galloped away. Palamona wandered by herself in the garden, trying to match things up. How he dotes on them, she thought. Long legs, strong back, wild eyes, flying mane, violent obedience. Yes, that's the way to earn my lordship's care. Now the hungry love in her mixed with the forbidden laughter and made striving in her so great that the sleeping girl either had to burst into tiny pieces or be stretched. She was racked by monstrous pain. She could not stretch. Her bones were locked by primal blight. She rose from her bed, took her leather jewel box, and climbed down a vine that grew to her window. A full moon rode the sky. She went to the field where she had first spied the bullman, but it was empty. Where is he? Where is he? She called to the birds. Where is he? They answered, Mile away, away, away. He drives his bulls 3 fields to the west. Thank you, friends. Do not seek him, sister. Do not. Farewell, farewell. She went westward until she saw him plowing his field in the moonlight. She flirted toward him, clinking her jewels. Do you travel alone, little girl? I do, good sir, all alone. And what does the little girl have in that box? Oh, nothing, really. Nothing? I hear something. What's in there? Oh, just some jewels. Jewels? Jewels, would you like to give those jewels to me, little girl? No, sir, I'd rather keep them. But I need them, you see. I must have them. You'd better not rob me. I live in the castle, you know. My father is lord of the hill. If you offer me harm, he'll surely cut off your head. With one hand, he clasped her about the waist and lifted her in the air, holding her before his face. She saw the wet gleam of his mouth and snaggled teeth. He twisted the jewel box from her grasp. I'll tell my father. No, you won't. You'll be dead, little one, eaten by the worms, and I'll keep your dainty bones to make buttons of. All your father will know is that his girl ran away and never came back, and I shall keep working my bulls and entertaining travelers and growing richer and richer. Yes. Quite gently he stripped her, carried her to the bulls, which he had turned tail to tail, then bound her legs to the trailing reins of one bull and her wrists to the reins of the other. He took 2 cudgels and struck the animals, crying out, Go! 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 Wave after wave of scalding pain passed through Palamona's body. Her intention flickered in the red mist of torment. She knew that she could ease her suffering by going limp and allowing herself to be torn in 2. But she braced her muscles and gave herself to agony. She heard the crackle of bones being wrenched out of their sockets, the foul twang of ligaments stretched too far. She held herself together, though. The bulls, angered by the unexpected resistance, lowered their heads and dug their hooves into the earth, and heaved and grunted, pulling themselves toward opposite ends of the field. Palamona clenched her teeth upon a scream, saving her breath for breathing, and knew in a final starry anguish as she passed from the safety of blight to the peril of growth. The bullman, watching, saw his beast going too slowly. He walked toward them and saw a tall shadow swimming in the moonlight. He heard the reins snap. He saw a figure towering over him. He turned to flee, but felt long fingers lock about his neck, felt himself being lifted into the air, dangling like a helpless kitten. He saw tumbling hair and eyes that were pits of light. He shuddered with an awful dread as he saw a great white arm rising. He heard himself sobbing. Palamona held her hand poised, savoring the idea of this brute whimpering like a whipped child. He wriggled in her grasp. She tightened her head. His head lulled. She didn't know whether she had crushed the breath out of him or whether he had swooned with fear, but she didn't care. He was a foulness in her hands. She threw him to the bulls, who poked at him doubtfully with their horns and began to trample him under their razor hooves. She snatched up the plow and hurled it high. She listened and finally heard it crash to the ground. She looked about at the bloody rags that had been the bullmen, at the bulls still trampling. Nothing would convince her of herself. She was unaccustomed to triumph. She loped homeward into the blazing moon, watching her enormous shadow run before. "This is but the cruelty of dreams," she said to herself. "How many nights have I grown tall in my sleep to be dwarfed by morning? Ogres, moonlight, bulls, plows, leaping over rivers, killing enemies. Surely, this is but a dream." She vaulted over the castle wall, too heavy now for swinging on vines, and she crouched and leaped through her chamber window. She curled up in her bed as tightly as she could to defend herself against dreams, but she moved in her sleep, her head pressed against the wall. Her legs dangled over the edge of the bed. She was so uncomfortable that she woke up and balanced herself on tottering long legs, like a colt and unused to itself. She walked up and down the room. Everything seemed as tiny as a doll's furniture. She looked down the glossy length of her legs with great satisfaction. Then she lifted the huge pier glass from the wall and held it like a hand mirror so that she could see her face. It seemed the same, but the golden eyes glared wildly back at her. She slanted the mirror this way and that, so she saw her tall, tapering legs from different angles and her muscled belly and new wide shoulders. And she was fascinated by her long, muscular column of a neck. She was full of angry joy. She smashed the mirror so it could never be used by a shorter girl and tried to laugh. The splintering glass laughed coldly back. The moon leered whitely beyond the windows. It stroked her hot, quivering body. She felt its maddening, weightless fingers and was able now, she knew, to pluck Melampus from his couch and set him on her back and canter away with him past the fields into the hills, running with him until he awoke from the drowse of sloth and rancor that had fastened on him like a poisoned sleep. And he would know whom he was riding and whom to thank. Howling softly, "Father, father!" she ran from her chamber and sought his. But it was not to be. His chamber was empty. She coursed to the castle, searching for him. He was gone. Everyone was gone. Silence lay upon the stone pile, thick as fog. She rushed to the stables. The halls were black holes. No orias, no horses, not even a mouse rustling in the straw. She heard a creaking and a rumbling and ran out of the stable. The castle was gone. The walls were falling. The great stone slabs did not crash to the ground, but crumbled as she watched, subsiding into dust. And somewhere she thought she heard a howl. The flagstones were gone. She stood upon earth. Where the castle had been, a cave mouth now yawned. She rushed to the cave. A huge rock blocked its entrance. She picked it up as if it were a pebble and tossed it away, stooped and crawled into the cave, but no one was there. She came out again and ran down the hill. Her garden was where it had been, but it was all weeds, and she marveled how a castle could move with a howl. "Melampus!" she cried. "Melampus! Melampus!" She heard the new musical thunder of her voice bouncing off the hill. She heard a dry choking sound and whirled about, and there in the middle of her garden was a pile of leather coils, rising from it a long stem of neck and a leather wedge of a head. Is it you? She whispered. Myself. The serpent did not sound like himself. Something muffled the hissing clarity of his speech. Tremors rippled down his long throat. She saw that he was weeping one by one, his tears. Un momento. The serpent was weeping. One by one, his tears dropped. Nothing glittered so coldly as the tears of a serpent weeping in the moonlight. Where is he? She said. Gone. Where? Tartarus. I don't believe it. He can't be dead. No, he is not dead. Then why is he in Tartarus? He was taken there, said the serpent. Hades' spies kept vigil. As soon as you left the castle, words flashed to the dark realm. She is gone. She loves Melampus no longer. She has gone out the window with her jewel box and will never return. This is what Hades was waiting for. Now he could strike. He sent his furies to take Melampus and to bring him to Tartarus alive, for it is the only living who can suffer ultimate torment, especially one like Melampus, who has trained himself to endure bodily pain. Such a one must be punished in another way. So there he stands in an alcove of hell, beginning that ordeal which is only the imagination of Hades could devise. What are they doing to him? Oh, Tartarus is beyond the land of death, you know, which means that it harbors not only the dead, but also those not yet born. There's an enormous spawning tank down there. In its waters swim the tiny fish-like shapes of those striving to be born. Melampus has been stationed there. It is his task to judge each creature as it swims past and decide whether or not it shall be permitted birth. He is given but a fraction of a second to decide, to dip his net and scoop out the chosen one. The ones not chosen are flushed away. And now this alcove is dense with onlookers. Black gulls hang above the tank, diving upon the rejected, which are tasty as sprats. There's an audience of fiends, too, studying the swarm of tiny swimmers. And now when Melampus chooses one who is destined to do well in life to come, who will be happy or heroic or useful, the demons are silent. But when they see his net holding one whom they have divined will be cruel or unjust or simply unhappy, why then they cackle their approval, their thin, jeering voices mingle in a fiendish shriek of glee as they celebrate bad news. And since by the nature of things most of his choices must be bad, he lives in this demonish din, the ugliest sound in all the world. Each time he chooses one with less confidence, but he must continue to choose, must continue to dip his net, knowing that his healing art is being twisted and perverted to serve the all-nothing, and the great-hearted doctor burns with shame and pain and loss, not in the ruddy blaze of physical pain, but in the cold blue fire of mental suffering. There must he freeze and burn for all time to come. Can what? Can no one deliver him? Cried Palamona. Who? Me? I'm strong enough for anything now. I'll go to Tartarus. I will arm myself with the great plow, and I will harrow hell. Softly, my girl, hissed the snake. You are new to your strength. You don't know how to use yourself yet. It may be that your love and his torment are part of a great purpose. And perhaps not. Perhaps you simply move in that monstrous waste beyond design. I don't know. I am trained to prediction, and I don't know. But there does seem to be a mighty force behind all this. Perhaps. Perhaps you have been enlarged to contain it. I do not know. I cannot tell. This much I do know. You must learn to use your giant abilities, girl. You must be polished by brutes, honed by ordeal. A task has been decreed for you. If you fulfill it in all its dire passages, you may be given what you want most, and you may not. There is no certainty. That is part of the ordeal. But to accomplish these labors is your only hope of seeing Olympus again. What must I do? What? You will receive your instructions from the king of Mycenae, whose name is Eurystheus. I thought someone else was king of that place. Not anymore. The fattest, laziest, meanest-minded prince in all the lands of Middle Sea has now become the fattest, laziest, meanest-minced king, for his father died last night. And such is to be my taskmaster? Yes. He will know you as Heraclea. The sky had reddened. Palamona saw the snake more clearly now. The whole mottled green and black weaving length of him. She grasped the smooth, throbbing cable, drew his head to hers, and kissed it. Thank you, serpent, first friend, thank you. Will you come to me sometimes and tell me what to do? Sometimes, said the serpent. You'd better get clothes for yourself, by the way. She stretched her great supple body, drinking the dawn wind. Where can I get anything to fit me? Go down to the river where it widens. You'll find an abandoned boat. Take its sail. You'll take a short tunic until you find something better to wear. Courtiers thronged the throne room, fawning about the new king of Mycenae. A stranger entered and walked slowly toward the throne. He was haughty bearing, very tall, wearing a black cape with bat wings. The mob fell way before him. He stood at the foot of the throne and said, I seek audience, O king. Speak, said Eurystheus. I seek private audience, O king. Private audience. Private audience. Private on the morning of my coronation. Who do you think you are? My name is Thanatos. I serve Hades. Out! Shouted Eurystheus to the crowd of courtiers, who vanished immediately. I crave your pardon, Thanatos, and I thank you for your honor of your visit. Please extend my gratitude to your master and assure him of my lasting veneration. Nothing lasts, little king. My master understands that terminations are his specialty. Ah, do not look upon me so gravely, cried Eurystheus. You frighten me. I do not come to frighten you, but to bring you certain instructions which, by the way, are being issued by my master, but originate with one even greater than he. Oh, terror, terror, speak, speak, I am yours to command. There will appear before you presently a young woman. She is under a decree of utter obedience, and it is you she must obey. Written upon this scroll, a certain task you will impose upon her. Of course, you'll impose the second only if she survives the first, which is doubtful, the third only if she survives the second, and so on. Eurystheus glanced at the parchment. Ridiculous! You should have used a shorter scroll. Good Thanatos. No one can accomplish even this first task, especially a woman. She will perish. It is well, said Thanatos. Death has grown amorous. Nevertheless, keep the scroll and set her about her labors. What is her name? Her name was Palamona. For god task shall be known as Heraclea. She's quite young. A girl! She won't make a mouthful for any of these creatures. Perhaps, but I cannot tarry. You have your instructions. Farewell. And he spread the wings of his cape and flew out of the throne room. Like leaves in a windstorm, the courtiers were sucked into the wake of his departure and fluttered back to the king. We come finally to the Nemean lion. I think we can wrap this up in 3 minutes, don't you? Or so. The king's palace stood on high ground in the fortress city of Messenia. A great wall surrounded the city, its only entrance a pair of massive iron gates. When Palamona came to the city, she found the gates closed. She shouted, but no one came. She saw sentries high on the wall, but they paid her no heed. She pounded on the gate, no one answered. She stepped back, studying the gates, trying to decide whether to climb them or to try to wrench the huge grills out of their stone sockets. She heard a clank of metal and saw a file of armed men coming down the avenue at half trot. They unbarred the gates and swung them open. She stepped forward, a hedge of spears formed in front of her. Her voice cried, "Halt!" The men fell back, forming an aisle of metal. Through it rode a man on a white truce horse. He carried a white herald staff. He raised the staff and cried, "In the king's name!" He reined up his horse and shouted, "Are you she who is called Heraclea?" "Yeah, I am now, I suppose. My business is with the king, though." "You will conduct your business with me. I bring instructions to you from Eurystheus, High King of Mycenae." "Why are the gates locked against me?" "King's orders." "I don't understand. Why the soldiers? Why am I barred entry? Why can I not speak with Eurystheus himself?" "King's orders, king's orders, king's orders. He does not deign to explain, and no one must question his decree." "No questions, no explanations. He has been king for but 3 days. His reign promises to be eventful, doesn't it?" "I do not intend to tarry here listening to treasonous remarks, but if you do not wish to receive the king's message, I shall return to the palace. The gates will be closed, and you can go back to Thessaly, or wherever you came from." "Forgive me, little herald," said Palamona. "If I seem awkward, it is because I am only a simple country lass and feel somewhat overwhelmed by this royal reception. Give me the message." She smiled down at him and saw his eyes fill with loathing. He had a sly, malicious, cheese-colored face under greasy brown curls, and the herald, looking up at her, felt himself choking with dismay. For he feared and disliked women, especially young, healthy ones. And this was more woman than he had ever seen. She towered over him on tall, golden legs. Sitting on horseback, he reached only to her breastbone. The muscles of her wide, sleek shoulders and long, tapering arms did not bulge, but writhed, half hidden like serpents with every move she made. She cast a fragrant heat like a garden in midsummer. He felt himself growing dizzy. He backed off his horse, took a bit of parchment from his pouch, stuck it on the end of his staff, and held it up to her so he would not have to touch her hand. She took the message and read it. "Kill the Nemean lion and bring its pelt back to Mycenae." "Nemean lion," she murmured. "The Nemean mountains lie between Corinth and Argos." "Well, you'd better get started then," said the herald. "What is your name, O courteous one?" "I am called Capricious." She smiled again, watching his averted face dark with rage. Coprious's in Greek, of course, means dung man, or one who does dirty jobs. "Coprius? Odd name for so elegant a herald." "I wear that name with pride. It signifies that I am the most loyal of the king's subjects, the one who can trust with the most unpleasant task." "Am I a task so unpleasant, then?" For the first time she saw him smile, a spasm of the lips more dismaying than any scowl. He said, "It's always unpleasant to send anyone off to certain death, especially one so young and such blooming health as yourself. Our king has been a lad himself, you know, and for all the dread authority vested in him, he has a very tender heart. That undoubtedly is why he denies himself the pleasure of conversing with you on this occasion." "Well, then, convey my humble thanks to the king," said Palamona, "and tell him that I mean to spare him further grief by surviving the lion's hunt." Coprius said, "The king has empowered me to give you some information about the game you hunt. Do you care to hear it?"
"Certainly, I shall be grateful for anything you can tell me."
Studying his face, she knew that he relished what he was about to say, which meant that she would not. Nevertheless, she understood that the more she learned about the lion, no matter how discouraging it might be, the better prepared she would be to fight the beast.
"Tell me, please," she murmured.
"First of all," said Coprius, "you were wrong. You did not wrap it up in 3 minutes, and I would say you've got at least 10 minutes left, lass."
Fine. Tell me all of it."
"Well, it's of monstrous size. Bigger than any elephant, they say. Its teeth are ivory knives, its claws are brass hooks. It wears a hide that no weapon can penetrate or pierce. For many years it has prowled the country between Corinth and Argos, killing men and cattle, snapping up children, goats, and dogs. Hunting parties have been sent against the monster. An entire generation of the keenest hunters and strongest warriors have sought to rid the land of its curse. They failed. Many were mauled to death. They were the lucky ones. Others were wounded and eaten alive. Of late, however, no one has hunted this lion, for it seems a hopeless task. His hide, as I said, is armor. Spears and arrows get off him like hail drops. No blade can pierce him. No net can hold him. In short, missy, the Nemean lion is pure yellow murder. Now the man's cheesy face was creased in a broad smile as he looked up at her, searching for signs of fear. She gazed back at him, laughed suddenly, reached down, plucked him from his horse, and turned him so that he was facing the horse's tail. "Dung man, farewell!" she chortled, and bounded away with great leaps, shouting with laughter. Now the likelihood of being killed did not worry the girl. She welcomed the idea of descending to Tartarus, for Melampus was there. What did plague her was the prospect of hurting an animal. And all her life she had never injured a living creature except for the murderous robber. How then could she bear to kill a beautiful big lion? This was the problem she pondered as she traveled from Messenia to Nemea. Since she could not solve it, she put it out of her mind and concentrated on smaller things. First of all, she had to arm herself. She already owned bow and arrow. Before leaving Thessaly, she had found a Titan longbow on the side of the vanished courtyard. It was an enormous bow made of polished ash wood strengthened with stag bone. She did not use it in mortal fashion, though, drawing bowstring only to breast, but in the powerful long-armed Titan way, bending the heavy bow almost in double. In practice, she had driven her bolts through a wall 3 feet thick. But now she wanted a spear, and she knew she had to make one. For the spears used by ordinary warriors seemed small as darts to her now. Searching only along the shore, she found a stove-in boat, which she dismasted. She broke the mast in two and took the slender half. She did not wish to tip it with the leaf-shaped spearhead commonly used. That kind of spearhead made a large wound, but she wanted more penetrating power. She found an old iron spike and drove it into the end of the mast. Then she sharpened the spike against a rock, flaking the rust off, bringing it to a needle point. She practiced with this spear, throwing it at trees. After half a day, she could split an oak in two at 50 paces. She kept busy so that she wouldn't have to think. Or rather, she thought of everything but her problem. Nevertheless, her thoughts came back to it. What could she do about not wanting to kill anything? She tried to do as Melampus had taught her, isolate her dilemma from her feelings and treat it as a problem in logic. Yes, she thought. But would he ever kill anything? Not likely, not even to save his own life. Perhaps to save someone else's, I don't know. But she had to stop thinking about Melampus. Hot tears gushed from her eyes. It was several miles before she could think of anything except her grief. Nevertheless, she did succeed in taking hold of herself and wrenching her thoughts back to her task. I seem destined to meet some terrible creatures, beginning with this lion, and in all likelihood ending with this lion. But if I do get past him somehow, there appears to be an array of other monsters in my future. The question is how to conduct myself. I'm large for a person, but tiny in comparison with these creatures. Therefore, I must cultivate other qualities. Speed, surprise. I must hone my wits so that I may be swift in decision also, and fertile in tactics. Swift. I must be sudden and swift. She found another use for a spear as a vaulting pole. On an empty stretch of beach, she came across an old temple with crumbling walls 30 feet high and practiced there. Holding her spear, she would run full speed at a wall, plant the butt of the spear, and hurl herself up, and the great shaft bent beneath her, and then recoiled. And then she, extending her arms and flattening her body, would ride the upspring, releasing the spear as it straightened and soaring over the wall. She vaulted rivers in this way, and huts. She loved to vault. It was like flying. Nevertheless, the critical question was still unanswered. When she reached Mount Nemea, how could she bring herself to stalk an animal and try to kill it? And so she was weakened by doubt as she stood on the slope of the mountain, deafened by a great racketing roar, waiting for the beast to approach. Smoothly, ponderously he came, sulphur yellow, the size of 3 lions, his teeth a murderous grin in the sunlight. Palamona crouched behind a boulder, watching. And as she saw him coming toward her, she felt her doubts dropping away. It was no animal she saw, but something else. True lions and tigers blend with the terrain, sun-tawny, striped with shadows. They belonged to their portion of earth, but this one belonged nowhere. He was an alien presence, Trees shuddered as he passed. The grass shrank away. His eyes were not gemmed with light. They were flat, blank discs, metallic. He stood outside the great life of chain of hunting, feeding, flight, and pursuit. He belonged only to death and visited the living as a fatal stranger. He was a monster, a reason for heroes. Now, watching him come, Palamona felt her mouth filling with the taste of honey. A delicious sweet chill laved her body, tuning her reflexes, loosening her muscles. Everything came alive. Trees and rocks loomed with miraculous clarity. The grass became filaments of light. Death slouched toward her and made the world new. She unslung her bow and notched an arrow. She waited for the lion to come closer, then launched her bolt. She saw it cleave the air and strike the beast's chest, clattering harmlessly to the ground. As fast as she could pull the arrow from her quiver, she launched her bolts. One after the other, they skidded off the lion and fell to the earth. The lion yawned, crouched slightly, and came toward her. She tossed her bow away and hurled her great spear. It glanced off his shoulder and split an ash tree. The lion yawned and prowled even closer. Now he was very close. She choked in the fumes of his rotting meat breath. She raised her club, which was a single uprooted tree with its twigs trimmed off, and she smashed it down on the beast's head. The club shattered and the lion struck. Palamona sprang away from the lightning jab of his paws, but not quite in time. One razor claw sheared away her sailcloth tunic and touched her thigh, and the touch was a wound. Naked now and bleeding, weaponless, she ran for her spear. The lion did not follow immediately, but sniffed at the bloody tunic, tail swishing, then raised his huge head to observe the futile antics of his prey. And they were futile, Palamona knew. But futility was no novelty to this girl. Magic, salvage, had been the lesson of her life. Despised, she had found love. Plain, she had become beautiful. Dwarfed, she had grown. I can't hurt him, she thought. With the stroke of his paw, light as caress, he rends my flesh. Well, these are the last moments of my life. I suppose I shall try to keep busy. And so Palamona whirled and ran uphill. The lion looked up from the tunic again, saw her running, and followed. Her tall legs flashed. She covered 10 feet at a stride. The lion, hardly seeming to move, gained ground with every step. The spear weighed her down as she ran, but she held on to it. She dodged behind a huge boulder and stabbed the earth behind it, driving the spear deep, and then planted her feet and pulled back on the haft. The boulder did not budge. The lion was coming uphill. Palamona heard herself crying strange words. Oh, mother, help me now. She pulled on the shaft, exerting all her tremendous strength. Red-hot needles jabbed her lungs. She went half blind with strain. Everything swam in a red mist, but she did not let go. She bent the shaft toward the ground, feeling the rock begin to move. The movement was joy. Joy mixed with pain and became strength, and then ebbed to pain again as the red mist darkened. Her last strength, she pressed the shaft. The butt end touched the ground. The boulder leaped out of its age-old socket of earth and began to roll downhill. It rolled terrifically, flattening bushes, picking up speed, going straight for the lion. Reacting with incredible speed, he leaped out of its path, but it grazed him and bowled him off his feet. He fell heavily and lay stunned. Filling with savage exultance, she saw her enemy fallen. She gave herself time to draw one deep breath that was pure energy. She yanked the spear from the earth, holding it like a vaulting pole. She charged downhill, planted the butt of her spear, and leaped. The shaft bent and then sprang straight, hurling her high. But she did not release her pole as vultures do. She clutched the spear, shifting her grip as she reached the top of her leap, turned in the air, holding the spear point first as she dived. The lion tried to scramble out of the way, but kept his head raised. And Palamona, striking with all the weight of her fall and all the coiled might of her shoulder muscles, drove the needle's sharp point and spike into the only part of him not shielded by his armor hide, into his eye. And through the thick jelly of his eye, the spike drove deep into his brain pan. Palamona twisted away as he writhed in agony, flailing at the spear shaft with his paws, snapping in air, snarling, frothing, dying monstrously, because he was, after all, a monster. Palamona staggered toward him. She was bruised from her fall, her wound bled, but triumph swallowed pain. She stood over the beast, watching him die. He was only twitching now. The twitching stopped. Now she had to skin him. Bring his pelt to Messenia, the order had read. How was she to take his hide that no blade could cut? Then an idea came to her. She studied the great tawny corpse. She knelt and snapped off one of his claws. It was the size of a dagger, but sharper than any dagger. Using the claw as a skinning knife, she flayed the beast and rolled his hide into a bundle. Palamona was reeling with fatigue now, but she had a few more things to do. She pulled out all the lion's claws to make arrowheads of. She reached into his maw and wrenched out his teeth, remembering dimly that Melampus had used ivory knives for surgery because he did not like the effect of metal cutting into living flesh. The memory of him brought no grief now. This battle had twisted Palamona into a new mode. She accomplished the first of her tasks. There was a remote hope, the serpent had said, that if she finished her mysterious labors, she might snatch her beloved from the hands of Hades. It was Melampus restored that she must think of now. Melampus restored, not Melampus gone. And this reeking corpse was a lion shape of hope.